The invitation slipped into my mailbox like a ghost from a life I thought I'd buried. No name, no return address, only the unmistakable gold, embossed Hart family crest sealing the envelope. I should have burned it. I should have thrown it away, unopened. Instead, standing alone in my modest downtown apartment, I slit the envelope open with trembling hands. Inside, a card elegant, heavy, and a simple message. The Hart family cordially invites you to celebrate the marriage of Emily Hart and Lucas Reed. Below it, scrawled in handwriting I knew better than my own. Just two desperate words. Please come, Emily, 5 years ago. They banished me without hesitation. 5 years ago, I walked out of that mansion stripped of their approval, their support, their so-called love. Now they wanted me back. Not as the disappointment they once disowned. Not as the failure they tried to erase. No. This time, I would walk in as Judge Valerie Hart, the sister they discarded, the daughter they erased, the woman they could no longer ignore, and they were about to find out I didn't need their approval. I outgrew it. The late autumn sun slanted through my apartment windows, casting long golden beams across the hardwood floor. I set the invitation down carefully on the coffee table, as if it might explode with the wrong touch. Emily's handwriting was unmistakable. Even after everything, my little sister still wrote her E's with a flourish, looping the tails like musical notes. It twisted something inside me I thought I'd long since cauterized. I leaned back on the couch, feeling the weight of 5 years settle on my chest. The last time I had been at the Hart family estate, I wasn't a judge. I was a dropout, a disgrace, the cautionary tale whispered behind manicured hands at galas and fundraisers. Richard Hart's eldest daughter, the one who refused to follow the family blueprint of medicine and money, the one who dared dream of a life outside their suffocating perfection. You're an embarrassment, my father had said after I announced I was leaving medical school. Don't come back unless you're ready to apologize. I never apologized. I never came back. Instead, I clawed my way through night classes, court internships, public defenders' offices, and bar exams while they toasted my absence with vintage champagne and carried on as if I'd never existed. Until now. Until this. I picked up the invitation again, staring at it like it might morph into something else. A mistake. A prank. But no, it was real. Emily was getting married. To Lucas Reed. And they wanted me. The invisible sister, to be there. Or at least, Emily did. I thought about ignoring it. I thought about setting it on fire and scattering the ashes into the Charles River. But the truth was, part of me ached to be seen. Not for their approval. Not anymore. But for something else entirely. To stand in that grand hall, amidst the gilded mirrors and priceless oil paintings, and show them who I had become without them. Not Valerie the dropout. Not Valerie the disappointment. Judge Valerie Hart. I grabbed my phone and texted Caroline. Me, you busy tonight? Need a brutally honest opinion. Seconds later, her reply flashed. Caroline, always ready for drama. Spill it. 20 minutes later, Caroline was on my doorstep, bottle of red wine in hand, her lawyer's tote bag slung over her shoulder. All right, she said, kicking off her heels and flopping onto my couch. What's the emergency? Courtroom scandal. Ex-boyfriend meltdown. Secret society initiation. Wordlessly, I handed her the invitation. She scanned it, her arched eyebrow lifting higher with each passing second. You're kidding, I shook my head. Her voice dropped into a low whistle. They finally remembered you exist. And, of course, it's about appearances. Weddings are good for photo ops. Even better when you can parade around the successful sister. They spent half a decade pretending was dead. She wasn't wrong. I poured us each a glass of wine, slumping into the chair across from her. So, she said, swirling her glass, are you going? I stared out the window where the city lights were beginning to blink on. One by one. I don't know, I admitted. Caroline leaned forward, her expression fierce. You're not going for them, you're going for you, to remind yourself and them exactly who you are now. I laughed humorlessly. Yeah, Judge Marshall may have presided over dozens of hearings, but walking back into that house feels scarier than facing down a courtroom full of hostile attorneys. Caroline clinked her glass against mine. which is exactly why you have to go. I sipped the wine, savoring the burn. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was my final closing argument, my last silent testimony to myself. I'd spent too long letting their rejection define me. Maybe it was time to define myself. The heart estate looked exactly as I remembered, maybe a little more manicured, a little more polished, but the bones were the same. White columns towering over the front steps, perfectly symmetrical windows gleaming like judgmental eyes. I parked my modest black sedan at the edge of the crowded circular drive, tucked between a line of luxury SUVs and imported sports cars. No valet came running. Fine. I adjusted my navy blue dress, smoothed my hair, and lifted my chin. I wasn't here for them. I was here for me. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. Guests milled around, sipping champagne, admiring the floral arrangements. I spotted my mother first, hovering near a massive ice sculpture of intertwined hearts. Her hair was a little grayer, her posture a little stiffer, but otherwise, she was the same. When she saw me, her glass slipped slightly in her hand. Shock, guilt, hope, all flashed across her face in rapid succession. I offered a polite nod. Nothing more. Emily's voice floated across the room. "There you are!" she cried, weaving through the crowd in a seafoam green dress. She threw her arms around me before I could react. "You came," she whispered fiercely into my ear. "I wasn't going to miss it," I said, voice low. She pulled back, her eyes shiny. "You look incredible." I smiled faintly. "So do you." Then I heard him, Lucas, laughing that same smug, self-assured laugh I remembered from court. I turned, and there he was. Tall, polished, handsome in a generic sort of way. He caught sight of me and froze. For a second, pure confusion clouded his face, then recognition slammed into him like a freight train. His mouth dropped open. "Your Honor." The words slipped out loud and unmistakable. The room fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses hovered in midair. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room swing toward me, curiosity sharpening into disbelief. Lucas's face drained of color. Emily's mouth formed a small, horrified O, and my father strode forward, his jaw tightening. "Valerie," he said, voice like a blade. "You're not supposed to be here." I met his gaze head on. "No," I said calmly. "I'm exactly where I meant to be." The tension in the ballroom crackled like a live wire. I stood my ground, the hush pressing against my eardrums, as if the very air in the room had thickened. Across from me, my father's face was a thundercloud. His hand tightened around the stem of his wine glass until the knuckles turned white. Beside him, my mother's eyes darted nervously between us. Silent, stricken. Only Emily seemed rooted in place, her fingers trembling slightly as she clutched the folds of her dress. "Valerie," my father said again, slower this time. "This isn't the right moment." "Maybe not for you," I replied evenly, my voice slicing through the brittle quiet. "But for me, it's long overdue. I wasn't here to cause a scene. I wasn't here for revenge. But I also wasn't here to vanish quietly into the corner, pretending the last 5 years hadn't happened. Not anymore." Lucas cleared his throat, color slowly returning to his cheeks. "Your Honor," he stammered awkwardly. I didn't realize. You didn't realize your fiancé's sister was a judge," I interrupted softly, letting the question hang in the air. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed into their napkin. Lucas swallowed hard. I thought Emily's sister had moved away, that she wasn't involved, as if I were a dropped thread in the perfect heart family tapestry. Emily stepped closer to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't tell him," she said, her hands wringing nervously. I thought it would make things easier. Easier. For who? For them, or for herself? Before I could answer, Caroline appeared at my side like a knight in sleek black heels. "Sorry I'm late," she said breezily, handing me a champagne flute she must have snagged from a passing server. She gave the crowd a pointed look. Did I miss the entertainment? I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I accepted the glass and turned back to my father. "You wanted a perfect event," I said quietly. "You wanted everything spotless, gleaming, ideal, A reflection of the heart name? He said nothing. Well, I continued, raising my glass slightly. Here I am, imperfect, inconvenient, unignorable. There was a beat of absolute silence. Then someone, probably one of the second cousins, started clapping. Tentatively, awkwardly. A moment later, others joined in. Polite, embarrassed, obligatory, but applause nonetheless. I inclined my head once, acknowledging it without basking in it. I hadn't come here for a standing ovation. I'd come here to stop hiding. Lucas, looking as though he wanted to sink into the polished marble floor, muttered something about needing to speak with the wedding planner and vanished into the crowd. My father made a stiff motion, as if to follow him, but my mother caught his sleeve. Leave it, she said under her breath, voice tight. You've done enough. He hesitated. Then, for the first time I could remember, he obeyed. Later, as the rehearsal dinner wound down, I wandered through the rose gardens alone. The cool Boston air bit at my bare shoulders. But I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was real, that this surreal evening had actually happened. Footsteps crunched over the gravel path behind me. I turned to find Emily approaching, arms wrapped around herself. Val, she said softly, stopping a few feet away. Please don't leave yet. I didn't answer immediately. She shifted, nervous. I should have told Lucas, she admitted. I should have told everyone. I didn't want them to look at you the way they used to. The way they used to, not her. Or was that just another lie she told herself to make it easier to sleep at night? Emily, I said, my voice gentler than I intended. You don't get to protect me by erasing me. Her eyes filled with tears. I know, she whispered. For a moment, we stood there, two women. Two sisters bridging a gulf built over years of silent betrayals. I never stopped being proud of you, she said fiercely, even when they made it sound like you were less. Her voice cracked on the last word. I really looked at her for the first time in years. She wasn't the golden child I remembered. There were cracks in the porcelain now, hairline fractures from years of carrying, expectations too heavy for one set of shoulders. Maybe we were more alike than I realized. I'm not here for them, I said quietly. She smiled through her tears. I know. And for the first time that evening, something inside me loosened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning, small, tentative, real, as I made my way back toward the house. I caught sight of Caroline standing by the French doors, waving her phone like a flag. I jogged up the steps. What is it? I asked. She grinned wickedly. You? She said, tapping her screen. Are currently trending on Twitter. I blinked. What? She flipped the phone around. There, under a trending hashtag Judge Heart Returns, was a blurry, candid photo of me facing Lucas and my father, chin high, champagne glass raised. A caption read, when they try to erase you, but you come back stronger, respect. Another added, Judge Valerie Hart, the icon we didn't know we needed. I stared at the screen, stunned. I didn't post it, Caroline said innocently, but I might have encouraged some of your old law school friends to. A laugh burst from my chest, sharp and surprised. For years, I'd felt invisible at best, a stain at worst. Now, somehow, my silence had become my armor. My refusal to hide had become my triumph. Tomorrow's wedding would bring its own battles. There would be icy glares, forced smiles, whispered comments behind champagne glasses. But tonight, I had already won. The next morning, Boston was wrapped in a thick, silvery fog, softening the sharp angles of the Hart estate into a blurred dreamscape. I stood at the window of my guest suite, watching the preparations unfold below. The wedding team bustled like ants, draping white silk over trellises, lining the aisle with pale pink roses, setting up endless rows of gold-trimmed chairs on the lawn. Today was supposed to be a fairy tale. Instead, it felt like a slow-motion collision. A soft knock came at the door. I turned to find Caroline, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and her phone clutched in the other. You're officially a folk hero, she said, handing me the mug. I took it gratefully, inhaling the rich scent before raising an eyebrow. Folk hero, she smirked. Social media's eating it up. Hashtag Judge Heart Returns is trending even higher this morning. Some legal bloggers are calling you the embodiment of quiet resilience. I snorted. Great. I always dreamed of being a meme. Own it, she said, tapping her phone against mine. Besides, you deserve to be seen. Finally, her words settled into me like warm sunlight. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to say that out loud. Downstairs, the family was gathering for pre-ceremony photographs. A professional photographer barked directions like a field commander. Parents of the bride, please. Siblings next. When Emily hesitated, looking between me and Lucas, the photographer frowned. Only direct family, he said briskly, glancing at his clipboard. Before Emily could say a word, I stepped back, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod. It's okay. I didn't need to be in their curated memories. Not when I'd finally learned how to build memories of my own. Emily's eyes glistened, but she nodded back, lips trembling in a silent thank you. The flashbulbs popped. The smiles were wide. The cracks in the facade deepened. I found a quiet corner in the garden to escape the chaos, tracing the rim of my coffee cup with my finger. Mind if I join you? A voice asked. It was Lucas. I tensed instinctively, but nodded once. He sat on the low stone wall beside me, his hands folded tightly in his lap. I'm sorry, he said finally, voice low. About yesterday. I stayed silent. He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly struggling. I didn't know, he said. Emily never told me. About everything. About you. I met his eyes squarely. You didn't ask either, I said, because it was easier not to. He flinched. You're right, he admitted. I liked the neat story, the perfect family, the legacy. He exhaled shakily. I wanted to fit in, to be enough. The words rang bitterly familiar. Hadn't I spent years chasing the same elusive approval? I sighed, the fight draining out of me. You know, I said quietly, fitting into a broken mold only cuts you in the end. He laughed bitterly. I'm learning that. We sat there for a moment. Two people who had been collateral damage to the Hart family mythology in different ways. I love Emily, he said at last, voice raw, and I want to be worthy of her, of whatever future we build, even if it means facing the parts of this family that aren't picture perfect. I studied him, searching for sincerity, and found it, buried under fear, but real. Then don't just promise her, I said. Prove it. He nodded solemnly. I will. And for the first time since I arrived, I believed he meant it. The ceremony itself unfolded under a tentative sun that slowly burned away the morning fog. Guests filled the gold chairs. The string quartet played Vivaldi. Emily appeared on the arm of my father, radiant in a simple gown of ivory lace. When she passed me in the front row, she squeezed my hand lightly, a brief, wordless tether between us. As the vows began, I watched Lucas's face, saw the way his voice wavered when he spoke of honesty and loyalty, saw how Emily's eyes never left his. When the minister finally said, You may kiss the bride, there was a heartbeat of silence, a space thick with everything that had been broken and rebuilt. And then they kissed, and the guests erupted in applause. This wasn't the fairy tale Emily had once imagined, but maybe it was something better, something real, something earned. That evening, as twilight painted the gardens in gold and indigo, the reception buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. I stood at the edge of the dance floor, sipping champagne, when my father approached. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The last time we stood face to face like this, he had called me an embarrassment. Now, he looked older, wearier, but maybe wiser too. I owe you an apology, he said stiffly, as if the words physically hurt to say. You owe me a lot of things, I replied, but there was no heat in my voice. He nodded, accepting the truth of it. You made something of yourself, he said finally. Something we didn't understand. Maybe still don't. I smiled faintly. I didn't make myself to spite you, I said. I made myself without you. He flinched, but he also inclined his head. A gesture of reluctant respect. It was the closest thing to reconciliation we might ever have. And for the first time, it was enough. Later, as the stars blinked awake over the Hart estate, I found myself standing alone at the edge of the lawn, gazing up at the endless, velvet sky. Caroline sidled up beside me. You know, she said, bumping her shoulder against mine. If you ever decide to run for higher office, you've got the best campaign ad already. Judge Hart survived her family. I laughed, really laughed, letting the sound roll out into the cool night. Maybe survival wasn't the end of the story. Maybe it was just the beginning. And this time, I would write every chapter myself, on my terms, without apology, without permission, without fear. The morning after the wedding, the Hart estate was eerily silent. Gone were the bustling staff, the clinking glasses, the bursts of laughter that had filled the gardens. All that remained was the aftermath: empty chairs scattered on the lawn, wilting centerpieces, and a faint, lingering scent of champagne and peonies. I sat alone in the breakfast room, nursing a black coffee, staring out at the mist curling through the manicured hedges. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like an unfinished sentence. You survived, Caroline said, breezing in with her usual dry humor. Barely, I muttered. She slid into the chair across from me, setting down a plate of toast she had absolutely no intention of eating. You know, she said casually, there's still one thing you haven't done. I raised an eyebrow. Escape to Tahiti, she grinned. Tempting. But no, I'm talking about finishing what you started. I frowned. Meaning, Caroline leaned in, voice lowering. Meaning, the real story. The reason why you were erased from the Hart narrative in the first place. I stiffened. I know why, I said flatly. I didn't fit the picture. She shook her head slowly. Maybe. But don't you think it's strange? The way your father reacts to you, the way certain conversations just stop when you enter a room. I hesitated. I chalked it up to disappointment, rejection, simple, brutal facts. But what if it wasn't simple at all? What are you suggesting? I asked. Caroline glanced around the empty room, then pulled something out of her bag, an old, battered, leather-bound notebook. I found this in the estate library, she said. Behind a false panel in one of the bookshelves, I stared at the worn cover. Heart hammering. It was embossed with a single initial E.E. Emily. Eleanor. Elizabeth. No, it hit me a second later. Elijah Hart. My grandfather. The founder of the Hart fortune. The patriarch everyone revered like a saint. With trembling fingers, I opened the first page. The handwriting was old-fashioned, but legible. Some truths, if left buried, rot and fester. Better they be unearthed by steady hands than uncovered by bitter ones. Beneath it, a date. Long before any of us were born, I flipped through the pages, skimming notes about business deals, family alliances, arranged marriages, and then something caught my eye. A passage dated June 1952. Robert will never forgive me if the truth emerges. Better to erase the mistake than risk the family's name. Robert Hart. My father. I stared at the words, mind spinning. What mistake? I whispered. Caroline tapped the page lightly. Keep reading. I did. And slowly, the pieces fell into place. A hidden adoption, a cover-up, a child brought into the Hart bloodline under the illusion of legitimacy for the sake of inheritance, reputation, legacy, a child who wasn't supposed to know. A chill swept through me. I wasn't just a disappointment, I said slowly. I looked up at Caroline. The first was never supposed to exist. She nodded grimly. You're not the daughter they disapproved of. You're the daughter they fabricated. The blood roared in my ears. All those years. The coldness, the distance, the shame. It hadn't been about failure. It had been about fear. Fear that if I shone too brightly, someone would start asking questions. Someone would uncover the carefully buried truth. I closed the notebook, hands shaking. What do I do with this? I whispered. Caroline leaned back, eyes steady. That depends, she said. Do you want revenge? I thought about it. About storming into the grand dining hall, slamming the notebook down on the polished mahogany, forcing my parents to face the lies they had built their lives upon. It would be satisfying, no doubt, for a moment. But satisfaction wasn't what I wanted anymore. I wanted freedom. I wanted peace. I wanted to stop carrying their secrets like shackles around my ankles. No, I said finally. No revenge. Caroline smiled approvingly. Good, she said, because real power isn't in tearing them down. It's in walking away while they're still trapped in the web they spun. I exhaled shakily. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't absolution. It was something better. Clarity. For the first time, I understood. Their silence hadn't broken me. It had revealed me. Stronger, sharper, free. I slid the notebook into my tote bag, not to weaponize it, not to bury it again, but to keep it a quiet testament to everything I had survived, everything I had built, not because of my family, but in spite of them. As the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the mist, I packed my things into the trunk of my modest black sedan. Emily hugged me fiercely before I left. Come back for Thanksgiving, she whispered. If you want. I hugged her back just as tightly. I'll think about it, I said. And for once, I meant it. I waved once to Caroline, who stood on the porch pretending not to cry. As for my parents, they didn't come to see me off. But that was fine. I'd stopped waiting for their approval a long time ago. I slipped into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. The road stretched ahead, endless and open, and for the first time in years, I wasn't running away from something. I was running towards something, my life, my truth, my future, and I wasn't looking back. 3 months later, my life barely resembled the one I had left behind at the Hart estate. I had moved into a small, sunlit apartment overlooking the Charles River, modest compared to the Hart mansion. But it was mine. Everything inside was handpicked by me, from the faded blue couch to the secondhand bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks and court reports. It felt like breathing fresh air after years of living under glass. I had also made another decision. I filed to officially change my name. Not abandoning the Hart name entirely, not yet, but choosing to legally add my middle name as a primary identifier, Valerie Elise Hart. A small but significant rebellion. I wasn't erasing my past. I was reclaiming it. Meanwhile, news from the Hart family trickled in through Emily. She had kept her promise to stay in touch. Her message is a lifeline of normalcy. James and Lucas are arguing about the foundation's finances again. Caroline cornered Dad during brunch and demanded he fund a new women's shelter in South Boston. Mom insists everything is fine, which means it's absolutely not. I laughed more often reading her updates than I had in years. Caroline had become something of a surprise ally, pushing for transparency in the family charities, questioning the Hart legacy that had once been untouchable. Apparently, cracks were forming in the polished marble, and for once, I wasn't trapped inside it. One evening, Emily called me in a flurry of excitement. Val, you'll never guess what just happened. I smiled, settling into my couch. Tell me, there's going to be a Hart family historical exhibit at the City Museum, she said breathlessly. And guess who's been asked to curate the section on our modern era? I blinked. Not you, she laughed. No, you. There was a stunned silence. Me, I repeated. Yes, she said. The board loved your work on environmental legal reforms, apparently. You're considered one of the distinguished Harts now. I laughed, a little hysterically. Are they aware the Harts tried to pretend I didn't exist? Emily snorted. Historical revisionism. It's a family specialty. I leaned back, letting the absurdity of it wash over me. The family that once erased me now wanted to display me under museum glass. I should have been furious. Instead, I found myself oddly amused. Send me the details, I said finally. I'll think about it. Atta girl, Emily said warmly. Make them face the truth, on your terms. 2 weeks later, I stood before the exhibit committee. I wore a navy suit, simple, elegant, a sharp contrast to the gaudy glamour the Harts once prized. As I presented my outline for the exhibit, highlighting not just the grand achievements, but also the missteps, the scandals, the real stories, I noticed a figure hovering at the back of the room. My father, Robert Hart. He stood stiffly, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. I hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then I continued, unflinching, unapologetic. When the presentation ended, Polite applause filled the room. The committee chair shook my hand warmly. "We're honored to have your voice, Miss Hart," she said. My father said nothing. He didn't approach. He didn't even make eye contact. He simply turned and left. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. It didn't wound me the way it once would have, because the applause wasn't for him. It was for me, for Valerie Elise Hart. That night, as I walked along the river, the autumn air crisp and bright with the scent of turning leaves, I called Caroline. "You'll never believe it," I said. "Try me," she replied dryly. I told her about the exhibit, about my father's silent retreat. She laughed, long and loud. "You realize," she said finally, "you've become exactly what terrifies them the most." "And what's that?" I asked. "Independent," she said simply. "Visible. Untouchable." I smiled at the dark water sparkling under the city lights. Maybe she was right. Maybe the greatest triumph wasn't revenge or confrontation. Maybe it was simply becoming undeniable. In the months that followed, the exhibit took shape. Emily helped with the logistics. Caroline occasionally sent snarky notes. "Please don't let them Photoshop Lucas's chin again." As for me, I focused on the narrative, not the sanitized family myth, but the real story, the struggles, the betrayals, the perseverance. A story not about a perfect bloodline, but about the resilience of those the family tried to forget, about the daughters they tried to silence, about the legacies they never intended to create. And when the exhibit opened and the crowds flooded in, I stood tall under the banner emblazoned with my name, not hidden, not erased, seen, finally, gloriously seen. 3 months after the exhibit opened, I thought the drama with the Hart family had finally settled into a distant hum. I was wrong. It started with an unexpected envelope, thick and cream-colored, bearing an embossed return address, Hart and Associates Legal Group. Not a museum mailing, not a thank you card. A summons, of sorts. Inside was a formal letter, stiff and painfully polite. "Dear Miss Valerie Elise Hart, you are cordially invited to a meeting regarding the future succession plans of the Hart Family Trust. Date, March 17th. Location, Hart Estate. West Wing Conference Room. Kindly confirm your attendance." I stared at the letter, half expecting it to burst into flames. Succession plans, trusts. This from the same family that once pretended I didn't exist. I forwarded a photo of the letter to Emily. Seconds later, my phone rang. "Have you lost your mind if you're even thinking of going?" she said without preamble. "I haven't decided," I admitted. "Val, this smells like a trap." I paced my living room, staring out at the river beyond. "Or it could be something else," I said slowly. "Like what?" Recognition. Even as I said it, the word tasted bitter. Caroline called later that night. "I heard about the summons," she said dryly. "Robert's idea, no doubt. You think it's genuine?" I asked. "I think it's convenient," she replied. "Your exhibit made you visible, respected. They can't erase you anymore. So now, they'll try to co-opt you." I rubbed my temples. "Should I go?" Caroline was quiet for a moment. "Only if you go as yourself," she said finally. "Not as the girl still hoping for their approval," I smiled grimly. "Noted." On the morning of the meeting, I dressed carefully. No muted tones, no understated jewelry. I chose a crimson blouse under a tailored black blazer. Striking, unapologetic, a statement. Emily offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I had to face alone. As I drove toward the Hart Estate, a place that once loomed like a fortress, I felt steady, not angry, not afraid, just ready. The West Wing conference room was as cold and intimidating as I remembered. Floor-to-ceiling windows, long mahogany table, oil portraits of Hart patriarchs staring down in judgment. Robert Hart, my father, sat at the head of the table, flanked by Lucas, Caroline, and a couple of stone-faced lawyers. Emily was absent, by prior agreement. This was strictly business, they had said. I took the empty seat opposite them. Nobody rose to greet me. Nobody smiled. Fine. I didn't expect them to. The lead attorney, a thin man with silver hair and a voice like dry paper, cleared his throat. "Miss Hart," he began formally. The family has convened today to discuss the adjustment of beneficiaries in the Hart Family Trust. He slid a document across the table. After recent public contributions and considerations, it has been proposed that you be added as a secondary beneficiary, effective immediately. I skimmed the paper. Legal jargon. Vague promises. Strings attached, no doubt. And what does that mean exactly? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. It means, Lucas said, his tone just shy of condescending, you'd finally have a seat at the table. And in return, I prompted. The room shifted uneasily. Robert Hart leaned forward, steepling his fingers. In return, you would agree to represent the family at certain public functions, maintain the Hart name with dignity, and refrain from any further public statements that could, tarnish our legacy. I almost laughed. So that was it. They didn't want me. They wanted the version of me that made them look good. The judge, the respectable daughter, the convenient decoration for their crumbling facade. I leaned back in my chair. I see, I said slowly. You want my reputation without acknowledging the years you spent pretending I didn't exist. Nobody answered. Their silence was all the answer I needed. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. Thank you for the offer, I said, voice steady. But I've already built my own table. I pushed the document back across the table. I don't need a seat at yours. Robert's face tightened. Lucas muttered something under his breath. Caroline, bless her, smiled faintly, pride glinting in her eyes. Without another word, I walked out, head high, heartbeat steady. No looking back that night. As I sipped tea in my quiet apartment, my phone buzzed. A message from Caroline, proud of you. Also, Lucas looks like he swallowed a lemon. I laughed out loud, setting the phone aside. I didn't need their trust fund. I didn't need their stage-managed love. I had something far rarer, freedom, self-respect, and a life entirely my own. The morning after I walked away from the Hart Estate meeting, the sky was a rare, brilliant blue. I took it as a sign. A small one, maybe. But after years of reading omens in closed doors and empty chairs, I was ready to believe in better symbols. I was sipping coffee and reviewing case files when an email popped up from an unfamiliar sender. Subject: Invitation to join the new Foundation for Civic Leadership. I clicked it open, expecting a generic newsletter. Instead, I found a personal message. Dear Judge Valerie Hart, we have been following your work, both in the courtroom and in your advocacy for historical transparency. Your recent exhibit and legal reforms have resonated with our mission to build a better, more inclusive future. We would be honored to invite you to join the Board of Trustees for the new Foundation for Civic Leadership, a national organization dedicated to fostering ethical leadership, mentorship programs, and civic responsibility. We believe your journey, your refusal to accept exclusion, and your commitment to justice embodies the very spirit we seek to inspire. If you are willing, we would love to discuss this further. I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't a handout. It wasn't a family pity prize. It was real. Earned. Mine. Emily was the first person I called. She screamed so loudly, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I knew it, she cried. I knew all that. Fire and fury would light the right kind of beacon. I laughed, the sound raw and real. Part of me still feels unworthy, I admitted. Good, Emily said immediately. That means you're not a narcissist. Now say yes before they change their minds. The official meeting was set for 2 weeks later at the Foundation's headquarters in New York City. I prepared with the same diligence I gave to every court case. Researched the board, members, reviewed the Foundation's impact reports, drafted potential initiatives I might propose, programs for young women in law, scholarships for students from underrepresented communities, leadership seminars for public service. This wasn't just a seat at a table. It was a chance to build a better table for everyone who'd ever been pushed aside like I had. When I arrived at the headquarters, a sleek, welcoming space filled with natural light, I was met by Dr. Evelyn Monroe, the Foundation's president. She was everything I hoped she would be: warm, brilliant, and grounded. Judge Hart, she said, shaking my hand firmly. We are so thrilled you're considering this. Thank you, I said, voice steady. It's an honor. We sat for nearly 2 hours, talking through their vision and mine. They didn't want a token. They didn't want a name on a letterhead. They wanted a partner, someone who believed in tearing down the old, exclusionary ways and replacing them with bridges wide enough for everyone. At the end of the meeting, Dr. Monroe smiled. "I'll be honest," she said, folding her hands. "There was some hesitation among our older board members when your name came up." I tensed. "But not because of your reputation," she said quickly. "Because they worried you'd say no, that you were too fiercely independent to want to join anyone's banner." I laughed. "Fierce independence," I repeated. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should," Dr. Monroe said warmly. "It's exactly what we need." She slid a folder across the table. "Take your time. Think it over. But if you're ready to join, we're ready to welcome you, fully." I stepped out into the cool New York afternoon feeling light, not vindicated, not victorious, free. I found a quiet bench in Central Park and texted Caroline, thinking of joining a new family. One built on choice, not obligation. She replied almost immediately. "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. Welcome home, Valerie." That night, back in my apartment, I pulled out my grandfather's journal, the one he had given me just before he passed. I flipped through the worn pages until I found the quote he had once underlined in thick, deliberate strokes. "Legacy is not what we leave for others. It's what we build alongside them, day by day, truth by truth." I smiled. I wasn't chasing their legacy anymore. I was building my own. And this time, it was mine from the foundation up. No apologies, no permission needed, just purpose. The evening of the gala arrived faster than I expected. The new Foundation for Civic Leadership was hosting its annual awards ceremony, this time with a special focus on architects of integrity. Dr. Monroe had called a week earlier to inform me that I would be one of the honorees, not just for my judicial work, but for standing firm when it would have been easier to stay silent, for reclaiming a narrative that others had tried to erase. The gala was at the Grand Lexington Hotel in Manhattan, an elegant old building dripping with gold chandeliers and quiet prestige. I wore a simple but striking navy gown, the same one I'd worn the night I was sworn in as a judge. Not because I couldn't afford something new, but because it reminded me of how far I'd come. A quiet power, a statement without shouting. Emily, of course, insisted on coming as my guest. "Someone needs to tackle you if you try to sneak out early," she teased, adjusting my necklace. "And someone needs to capture your 'I'm a boss's' moment for Instagram," Boris added from behind his camera. I rolled my eyes but let them fuss. Tonight, I wasn't hiding anymore. The ballroom was packed with luminaries from law, politics, education, and social justice. As I entered, a polite ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. It wasn't overwhelming, not celebrity, just respect. The kind that comes when people know you earned your place, step by brutal step. Midway through dinner, as the speeches began, Dr. Monroe took the stage. She spoke about courage, about those who built bridges rather than walls. And then, as she called my name, the lights shifted, a soft spotlight finding me at my table. "Please welcome Judge Valerie Hart," she said, "an architect of integrity." As I rose and made my way to the stage, applause filled the room. I paused at the stairs for a brief moment, absorbing it. Not applause bought by a last name. Not applause demanded by legacy. Applause earned. I delivered a short speech, my voice steady. "We inherit legacies, yes, but we are not bound by them. We can choose to write new stories, not out of anger, not out of defiance, but out of love for what could be better. Tonight, I accept this not just for myself, but for every girl who was told she wasn't enough and who rose anyway." As I left the stage, a standing ovation erupted. I felt the tears prickling behind my eyes but refused to let them fall. Not tonight. Later, as the crowd mingled with cocktails and desserts, I stood near the tall windows overlooking the city lights. Emily pressed a glass of champagne into my hand, grinning. "You killed it," she said. "Like, Pulitzer Prize level killed it." I laughed, then froze when I caught sight of two familiar figures across the room. Alexander Hart, my father, and behind him, Margaret Hart, my mother. They stood by the entrance, out of place amid the polished crowd. awkward in the way people are when they aren't sure if they belong. My heart twisted. They hadn't announced themselves. No grand entrances, just there. My instincts screamed to retreat, but something deeper rooted my feet to the floor. After a long moment, I crossed the room, slowly, deliberately. When I reached them, we stood in silence for several beats. My father cleared his throat first. "You looked powerful up there," he said gruffly. "Thank you," I said quietly. My mother stepped forward, holding something in her hands. A small, battered photo frame. Inside was a snapshot. Me at age 7, holding a blue ribbon for a county science fair project. The same ribbon they'd barely noticed at the time. "I found this when we cleaned out the attic," she said, voice trembling. "I thought you might want it." I took it carefully, running my fingers over the cracked glass. "I used to think it didn't matter," she whispered, "that you'd forget, that you'd stop needing us." I swallowed. I did forget. I said honestly, eventually. I had to. The pain in their faces was palpable, but there was no anger in me anymore, only the clean, sharp ache of old wounds aired out properly at last. "You built something incredible," my father said, voice thick. "Without us." "Yes," I agreed. "And we're sorry," he added. A simple sentence. No justifications. No defenses. Just truth. I nodded once. "I appreciate that," I said. "But forgiveness isn't a handshake. It's time. And showing up. We'll try," my mother said quietly. "For as long as it takes," my father added. I looked out over the glittering city beyond the windows. "Then we'll see," I said. We didn't hug. There were no movie scene reconciliations. But for the first time, we were speaking honestly. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. As I turned back to the party, Emily appeared at my side. She didn't ask what happened, she just squeezed my hand once. Hard. I smiled. "The family you build? That's the one that saves you." And as the night stretched on and the city glittered like 1,000 promises, I realized I was never the one who needed saving. I was the one who kept walking when no one else dared. And that, in the end, was the real legacy.